You're listening to the Back Home Network, presented by Home Field Apparel.
Welcome back to Crimson Cast. Galen Clavio, Scott Caulfield joining you. It's being recorded on Monday, the 16th of December. I don't know when you're listening to it. This might come out Wednesday morning, I think. We've got a string of podcasts coming out here over the course of the next couple of days. You probably already heard the preview with Taylor, and we're going to have a couple other cool guests coming up here before the end of the week. But Scott and I wanted to get together and talk about the game before the game happened. Indiana, of course, taking on Notre Dame. And Scott, it's
so much. I feel like we have to talk before this game.
No, we do. No question. I'm excited about it. And I'm excited to talk with you about it. It's one of those things, though, where it's just kind of like I'm a little worried because, we don't normally do preview podcasts. And now we're doing one. But the cause is sufficient here, Indiana, for the first time in a college football playoff game. And this is an order of magnitude greater than anything we've seen an Indiana football team participate in our lifetimes. So it's exciting. And Scott, the standout thing is just a ton of people appear to be going from Indiana, including you, including me. We're going to be up there. It's going to be, I think, just an amazing array of IU fans from all over the state of Indiana. I've got people coming in from outside the state of Indiana. This is the target. South Bend, I don't think will have seen this type of an invasion quite this way with this type of a game. Certainly they've had teams come in from outside. Georgia's been up there. Ohio State's been up there. But it's a little different here because A, it's a college football playoff game, and B, it's an in-state game. And like that is a really fascinating script to think about all the way around.
It feels similar to a little bit like going to the UCLA game. Like a lot of people I knew were like, oh, I'm going to that, or I know someone going to that. But I'm with you. There's an order of magnitude here where we were going to have some friends over, and then it's like they're like, we're actually going to the game. And someone else like, we got tickets to the game, and then like we normally sit with our friends Jeff and Carol, and like Jeff was like, I got tickets to the game, and then I have a great friend who happened to get his hands on 4 tickets, and he was like, if I can't go, I'd love for you to have 2. And what's funny is leading up to it, I coached, as you've heard, I've coached my son in rec league basketball, and we hadn't won. We won last week, which really helped. But I was kind of like, hey, look, I couldn't get tickets. Like, I just got to be there for my son. I can't imagine missing his first game. Like, missing his first win, that'd be awful. Like, I couldn't live with myself. And then my buddy calls, he's like, I have 2 tickets. I'm like, great, all right. Sorry, James, can't make it to the game. Like, all of that went out the window. It's like, well, I could be a 98% good dad. I'm going to the game. My wife is taking off work early. We are busting out. And yeah, I'm with you. It feels like everyone I know is going to the game. And obviously we're not taking over Notre Dame Stadium.
Right.
But even the UCLA thing, that was a high proportion of fans. And I'll say you and I were at the Gator Bowl. There was a lot of IU fans, even compared to Tennessee, which Tennessee is a blue blood. So I expect to see a pretty good showing in South Bend.
I just want to note, like, my parents never came to my youth sports games. Like I turned out fine. I still like sports. Like I don't feel like I lost a lot. So I think all of you who are like, oh, I couldn't possibly because my 4th graders basketball team is playing, like they'll be fine. Like seriously, send the grandparents. I
know. Well, I was coaching, but yes, everything's fine. I think it'll be all right.
If Division I coaches can get suspended and miss games, and their teams can continue to operate, I think you'll be fine.
I should have done that. I should have had a kid spying on other games and just done the hardball, where it's like I was in a hotel room. I just couldn't make it to the game. Sorry. Yeah.
Just write like insulting letters to whoever's organizing the league. Get yourself suspended. You're sprung. You're scot free.
Like 2 weeks of wearing the khakis and standing on the sideline. Right. Anyway. All right.
Anyway, before we get started, just a reminder: we're brought to you by Home Field Apparel, your place to go for the finest in college fashions, the softest fabrics, the coolest designs. If you want to outfit yourself, Indiana fans, in CFP apparel that features Indiana, you got to go to Home Field Apparel. They've got a whole lineup. They've got everything from long sleeves and T-shirts, retro 90s looks. They've got more modern, like the black with the logo on it and everything. They've got a nice red hoodie with the IU helmet on it that's CFP. I think I ordered like 2 or 3 of those things, Scott. Like, I mean, what a collector's item. It's not like this particular matchup or Indiana being in the playoff for the first time is ever going to happen again. Indiana will be in the playoff again, but they won't be in the playoff for the first time ever again. So get over to homefieldapparel.com, use the code HOME23, get 15% off your first order. Subscribe to the Home Field newsletter. If you had, you could have done what I did when I ordered, which was get the 30% off deal the day that it was happening. And, that's what you get with the newsletter from Home Field Apparel. Follow them on social media, on X, on Instagram. They do a great job over there. Again, homefieldapparel.com, proud sponsor of the Back Home Network. Also, just a reminder, crimsoncast.substack.com, your place to go for in your email inbox updates on podcasts that we do. We send those out. We also have some VIP videos that we'll send out to subscribers. It's $5 a month, $50 a year, helps keep the lights on here, and maybe pays for a ring light for Scott at some point. Is that in the future at all?
I mean, yes, I could probably work. I might need to get a little more lighting here.
You're kind of in this at night. You're kind of in the shadows. I'm worried that
I have like windows facing out that normally get a little more natural light. Yeah.
I'm concerned the audience will be frightened if they see you on YouTube. That's my biggest concern here. I just want to make sure that we take care of business.
Maybe less Scott is probably better, I think.
Possibly. Yeah. But no, anyway, head over to the Substack, join the over 1,100 folks that have subscribed to us on Substack. We'd love to have you in the family. All right, Scott, let's talk about this matchup more generally as we get into things. Indiana at Notre Dame, 8 p.m. ABC, first college football playoff game of this season. And, there was so much talk and back and forth. Does Indiana belong? Like, where do they belong? They were clearly in. We talked about this after the Michigan game. Like, one of the reasons why that was such a relief was it's like, okay, they're in the playoff, like unless they lose to Purdue, which seemed unlikely, and as it turned out was very unlikely. Even if they lost to Ohio State, they were going to be in. And, there were some anxious moments there as everybody kept trying to say, well, no, Indiana doesn't belong. Well, they clearly belong. They were not the last team in by any means. And to take on Notre Dame, of all teams, to start this playoff journey, it's really fascinating. And I've started to see some interesting articles about it. There was a good article in the Herald Times about the fact that these teams don't have a rivalry. They don't really have much of a history. Most of the history is way, way back, like pre-World War II. It's two fan bases that are very alike in a lot of ways. Not so much the people that went to Notre Dame, but as we know, that's not a lot of the Notre Dame fan base because Notre Dame was so successful. And it's like when you talk about reversible jacket fans, which has been talked about a lot this week, it's really like people who affiliate with schools because they're very successful, as Indiana basketball was in the 70s and 80s and 90s. But the people are pretty much the same, and this is, I think, this is something we talked about a little bit with Taylor, but I want to talk about more with you. The number of people who traditionally root for Notre Dame in football and are now kind of confronted with this interesting choice where it's like, well, I went to Indiana, or I really like Indiana, and now Indiana's good and they're playing Notre Dame, and Indiana's kind of the underdog story here. Like, they're the team that no one thought was supposed to be here. They're not Notre Dame. They don't carry themselves with this aura of invincibility. And that has made Indiana, I think, maybe more of a sentimental choice amongst some people. Now, there's still a ton of people who are, the big Notre Dame football fans are going to remain that way. Certainly understand that. But I do think it's interesting, like, this matchup, the way that it's going down, makes for a fascinating dichotomy in terms of how people look at themselves if they're anywhere in Indiana and they've, had any kind of flirtations with these programs or these athletic departments before.
What I wonder for people who are not in Indiana is how many, like, people in, South Carolina or something, do they realize this is an in-state matchup? Like, I think for so many people, Notre Dame is just kind of, it is like Notre Dame just exists in this other plane where it's like, this is in South Bend, it's in Indiana, these are two Indiana schools. I'm sure some people will tune in from other parts of the country. It's like, oh, I didn't know that, that's interesting. No, you are right. The fan bases probably have more in common than they like to think about. I'm going to take a step back. What I think, people should do for the next couple of days is just enjoy this moment, because we kind of got so worked up in the, do we belong? Do we need to be there? All the CFP thing. And you kind of, you took the bows and arrows from the SEC folks. This is the moment. You just never get, I keep on saying this, you never get to go up the mountain twice. So we might be here again. We might be in another college football playoff. It'll never be this. And it just feels so perfect that we're playing Notre Dame. Like, it is almost like the ultimate. It's a great matchup for us, but it's just like, it is one of the premier schools in college football, but it's close. It's touchable. And while there is no connection, there's not a ton of connection. Like, there's some.
Right.
And versus like if we were playing Alabama, it would just be like, no idea.
We're playing a team from another country,
right.
Essentially. Yes.
Yeah, we're playing Uruguay or something.
Right.
So, but I was thinking about, we've both been trying to kind of put into words how just surreal all of it is. But I really want to try and enjoy, we were talking about kids. This is an odd relation, odd thing I'm thinking, but it's like, I think back to those first couple of weeks when we brought our son home for the first time, and it's like, those were crazy times, but in a way, it's like, I kind of wish I could go back. You can never go back to that moment again. And just the wonder of that. And that's kind of where I feel like this week is for me, is just God, we're about to play a college football playoff game on Friday. And I want to just enjoy all of the moments, because after it's done, it'll be done. And if we win, that's awesome. But it's like, you're moving on and suddenly the stakes get raised. If it's over, it's over, and this ride gets to an end. Like you were talking to Mitchell on the last pod, it's like, I don't quite know what I'm gonna do for the next 9 months without football. So sorry, just taking a step back on that, just kind of like, we should all just enjoy this moment, because we will really never be here again. And it's like, I'm wearing the sweatshirt from the Rose Bowl team, and it's so funny. I would be at IU, and I would think about, man, what would it be like to have gone to IU when they went to the Rose Bowl? Or like, what would it have been like to be there in 75, 76, where you had back-to-back teams that lost one game? And like, that was, God, it's like, we knew about the history of it. And like, you could touch like, oh, that's Bob Knight. Like there's Quinn Buckner. Like those are people who were on that team. There's Kent Benson. But like, you just read about what it was like. It's so crazy to think that 50, 60, 70 years from now, like we're going to be, so many metaphors here. Like we're going to be the hickory poster on the wall that the kids shooting baskets at, like from the movie Hoosiers, but we're living it right now. And it's just, that's the part I'm having a really hard time wrapping my mind around, is like right now we are living in a moment in 50 or 60 years that people will be looking back on and be like, man, what was that like to live through? And like, we're doing it.
Yeah, it really is fascinating to think through that aspect. And we've talked about it a little bit in previous episodes, but it's like, we're not really well equipped as human beings to think about how momentous things are in that space, in that temporal space that you're experiencing them, which is, I think how it's probably supposed to be. Like you never realize you're living in revolutionary times until the revolution's already stopped to some degree. And yet here, I think that's been the coolest part of all of this. And especially this last week and a half, as I've reflected on it a bit, I've been putting together like some Instagram reels that kind of, I go back and look at the pictures and the videos that I took from the various games, and reliving internally what that felt like and what this whole ride has been like. And, I think you can be like Curt Cignetti says IU is, and say, we're not satisfied. Like we feel like we've got more to go. And I think you can feel that way as fans. And I think you can feel really good about Indiana's chances statistically in this game. I think Indiana matches up pretty well with Notre Dame in a bunch of ways, but you can feel that way and still take a step back and acknowledge the momentous nature of what IU is looking at as they move forward here into this game. And I think really the fact that it's Notre Dame you're playing, as you mentioned at the beginning of that, factors in even more.
Right.
It's because it's like the one big school in the Midwest that you never play. It'd be different if you were playing Ohio State. It'd be different if you were playing Michigan. It'd be different if you were playing Penn State. But it's Notre Dame. And I don't know about you, and maybe this is different for folks in the audience. I came of age like right at the tail end of when Notre Dame was like a legitimate superpower. Obviously, I remember like the 93 season, when they were going back and forth. Obviously a couple years earlier they won that national title, but you start to get into the mid 90s, and a lot of the luster of Notre Dame as a invincible brand that they'd built up for decades kind of went away. And I enjoyed that a little bit, in as much as I was really tired. I remember I wasn't really a huge college football fan until about 1990, but I was surrounded by a bunch of people who were Notre Dame fans, and they were just as obnoxious about it as Indiana basketball fans were during that time. Yeah. And I did enjoy, to some degree, in a schadenfreude sort of way, watching Notre Dame struggle the way, not quite as bad as Indiana had struggled, but it was like they always seemed to regress back. They hired the wrong coaches. They did a bunch of stuff that felt like that's what mortal programs did, not Notre Dame. but still, they went to a national championship game. They kind of regained their mojo under Brian Kelly. They did a lot of things right, and here they are once again in the college football playoff. They've got a really good coach in Marcus Freeman, and yet, it's like for Indiana, it feels like another rite of passage. Getting into the college football playoff is a rite of passage in and of itself. It kind of means, you're going to be in that club, and that's a really exclusive club. It'll become slightly less exclusive, but it's still a pretty exclusive club as we move forward. But then to play Notre Dame, where it's like there's not that much enmity between Notre Dame and Indiana. There's not a lot of bad blood because there's been no blood spilled,
right.
which gives us an almost, it's an in-state thing. South Bend, despite having Notre Dame in it, probably has more IU grads in it than Notre Dame grads. That whole region, and you take Chicago, which probably, you have more IU fans there than you have Notre Dame alums, probably more Notre Dame fans, I would guess. But it just makes for this really fascinating mix where it's like, I don't hate Notre Dame. I resented their place in college football to some degree because it always felt like they held themselves above the state a bit. But I understand why, because they are certainly a national brand in a way that most of the other teams in the Midwest are not. But the whole thing is just kind of an odd confluence that it's happening in the college football playoff, the same year that Indiana kind of finally arrives on the national stage in college football. I don't know if I summarized all of that, but that's a lot of the threads that I've got running through my head on this thing.
Yeah, I'm with a lot of that. I mean, we're almost the same age, like a year apart. I think the movie Rudy has done more for Notre Dame than almost anything, because that was a pivotal time because Notre Dame had kind of slipped off. And then, I was also I remember the Lou Holtz team in '88 that won. But when that movie came out, I was like, oh, wow, Notre Dame's got a lot of history. People really care about this school that kind of isn't that good. And then, but it's like you also have something similar with, like, again, Indiana, like Hoosiers wasn't about IU, but it definitely was, like Hoosiers kind of gets connected with the Indiana basketball at large, and kind of like Coach Dale is a representation of Coach Knight. And they both kind of fell off in the 90s. And Notre Dame football kind of found a way back. Indiana basketball didn't. But no, it's like the perfect team to play. I mean, I'd rather probably be playing Arizona State, but it wouldn't have the same gravitas of like, we're going into Notre Dame, we're playing a night game. Like, there's not a lot of night, like, there's the famous, like, Matt Leinart getting the push when he's playing for USC in the night game against Notre Dame. Like, you have an iconic moment in a night game in Notre Dame Stadium, it becomes an iconic college football moment.
Yeah.
And that's like, that is what is at the feet here of this Indiana team. And it's really cool. And what I also really like is, we're still getting, you're still listening to stuff where, you still get the people like, oh man, Alabama, like they should be in over SMU. Like, hell, they should be in over Indiana. Like, you're still getting like arrows from people out there. You play this game tough and you win this, like, it just, all of that goes away. And not that it matters. And if you don't win, it's not the end of the world, but
I don't think they go away. I think immediately becomes, oh, Notre Dame must have been fraudulent, which is that's been the script that Indiana's dealt with all season. Indiana was going to face good teams, they're going to beat them, and then they beat the crap out of those teams, and those teams suddenly weren't good anymore. That's exactly what will happen with Notre Dame if Indiana
we're
goes
win the title. It's like, this 12-team format was wrong. Like,
it was wrong.
Wrong champion. We got to go to an 18-team format. Like, we'll put an asterisk on that title. I hear you, but I do think nationally, like, that's how you shut up the narrative of, you go out there and win. But it's that to me is like, that's what's, again, I'm taking a step back. You don't have to win, but I'm just saying that's what I think is so cool here is, unlike some of these other matchups, even a game at Tennessee, it's like, all right, that'd be cool. Like, that'd be fun. There's really something very special about Notre Dame. And it is a cut above, and it can be annoying, but it's like, they are something different in college football. And night games there, the helmets, like, you do something special there, it can be a big moment. And it's really cool that Indiana has that at their feet. And it's not, when we played there in 91, I was kind of into football. Like, I vaguely remember it. It's not like we thought we had a real chance to win. This feels like we have a real chance to win. And you're playing for some unbelievable stakes. It's the first game of the college football playoff.
Right. So as we think about I guess some of the items that you want to consider going into this game, we're not going to talk a whole lot about X's and O's in this one per se, but a lot of it is, this is another big moment for Indiana. And it's a moment that Indiana has to essentially raise the bar of what you could expect out of them. And I, as much as we defended Indiana's schedule, and you can only beat the teams that you have on the schedule, and Indiana did that really well, it's a fair criticism to say that Indiana really didn't get tested that much. Now, it is interesting. Like, Indiana actually played 4 road games this year. Notre Dame only played 3. Yes, they played some neutral site games, but when one of those road games is against Purdue, I think one of the road games was against Purdue. It's like, oh, they really played 2 road games this year. But all that said,
when you hear all this talk about strength of schedule and like Indiana gets pulled in, I'm always like, do Notre Dame, please. Like, somebody please do Notre Dame, because like yes, maybe we don't match up to, like, our strength of schedule isn't as great as Alabama's, but like, do Notre Dame. Like, Notre Dame seems to just kind of float above this because, oh, well, they're good. Like, they're Notre Dame. And it's like, are they?
Yeah, I know. But so much of it really does come down to, in college football, especially, the where you're playing and overcoming the environment is such a huge aspect of what you have to do. And it's not as big of a stadium as Ohio Stadium or the Big House or Beaver Stadium, but it's Notre Dame Stadium. And it's one of the more iconic venues in the entirety of college football in terms of just the imagery around it and what it's meant and how much success that there's been there. And, for Indiana, you've got to be impressed with the mentality that they've had throughout most of the season in terms of not letting that stuff trip them up. Even at Ohio Stadium, it wasn't so much the moment that overcame them as much as it was the rain and the crowd noise,
right,
neither of which I think they're going to have to deal with in this game. But that emotional aspect of, we are in this game and we're going to have to do X, Y, and Z, and there's a lot of pressure on us. I am interested, how much does that affect Indiana directly? There was a comment from Fred Glass. I don't know if you saw the comment from Fred Glass, but essentially, and Fred's enjoyed uncorking some of these things on people since he retired. I give him credit for it, but he was like, all the pressure's on Notre Dame, because Notre Dame's they're expected to win. There are a few people that have picked Indiana to win in this game. I don't think anybody's expecting Indiana to win this game. Now, that can be a positive or negative. Notre Dame is certainly expecting to win this game. How does Indiana deal with having to come into that environment and perform? And can they do so in a way where they keep their nerve and are not bothered by the surroundings and the things that they're dealing with in the game is an interesting question to me.
I was thinking about this. I have a couple things I want to highlight from your podcast with Mitchell Page, which was really, really good. But one of the things you talked about was this idea of, there's all of this hoopla around the game. Game day is going to be there. And it got me thinking, like, this is wild to say. It's like, well, but if you're IU, it's like, well, this is the third time we'll be in a game day game. like that's wild to think. Like, normally that would be like, oh my God, like, it's game day. Like, game day is going to be there. Like, Kirk Herbstreit, like, that's going to throw the guys. Now it's like, oh, this is the third time. Like, we're used to game day, like big noon kickoff. Like, the amount of times, like, yes, you had the one game at Ohio State, but the other way to look at it is there was a lot of buildup before the Nebraska game. I mean, you had big noon kickoff. That was a bye week of just kind of this team, like, oh my God, you're 6-0. Like, this is really something. Like, can they really do it? You got to play a real team. That would have been a moment you could have easily stubbed your toe as a team. Then you have the Washington game. You're coming off of that same week, even more hype. Game day is there. It's, you have a backup quarterback playing a game. That is a very easy spot where the hype could have been too much and it wasn't there. Even the Michigan game, that's like, all right, this is the real test. This is the bar you got to clear. I mean, that's at least what we thought. We didn't realize the bar would continue. We didn't realize they would all suck after we play them. But, that was a game that you came out and you played really well and you started well. And again, even the Ohio State game, it wasn't a win. I really bristle, just side note, hearing people talk about it, like, oh, Indiana got blown out at Ohio State. It's like, we did not get blown out. Like, Purdue got blown out when we played them. Like, we lost at Ohio State. It wasn't awesome. I wouldn't say we got blown out, but you come out there, it's not like we were scared. We went up 7-0. We held them on a goal line stand. Like, we came out and had a very good start against Ohio State. We didn't look like we weren't ready to go. We made some mistakes. And as you said, a lot of it might have been snap count and just some of the noise and the weather. But every other time this season, and even the Ohio State game for the beginning of it, when that moment got magnified and the light really got bright on this team has delivered.
Yeah.
And that's what makes me very excited about this is, there really isn't a moment, again, outside of, I think there's a couple ways you can look at the Ohio State game. I tend to look at it as like, if you have a couple of those mistakes taken off the board, it's probably a much different game, or at least a much closer game. All that said, most of the time when you've had these moments come up and you have all the attention and like suddenly everyone's talking about Indiana, they've responded. And a lot of times they've responded big.
Yeah, no, it's true. I mean, it's one of those where you can kind of talk yourself into whatever narrative you want. And I've struggled back and forth with that. Like I talked about it on the podcast with Taylor. If they don't drop the punt and it's a tie game going into half, like how different does the second half look? Maybe it doesn't look different at all. Maybe Indiana loses by the same amount. Maybe Indiana's in the game a lot longer. That game felt like it spiraled out of control, but there's a non-zero chance that Indiana was just an inferior team. And, that becomes the big question mark with Notre Dame. It's like the hallmark, these two teams have different things that make them good. Notre Dame is a legitimately talented football team. They're probably not as talented as your average SEC team. They're probably not as talented as Ohio State, but they're a really talented football team. And they're well coached. And they've been very, very good at grinding their opponents into dust. Indiana has been good for different reasons. Indiana's got talent, but not the same caliber of athletic talent that Notre Dame's got. Their effectiveness has been in their efficiency and in their game planning, and in their ability to be very, very relentless and just kind of gradually do the same thing that Notre Dame did in a lot of their games. It's just that I think you can make the argument down the stretch Indiana played tougher competition than Notre Dame did. Like Indiana had to play Michigan and Ohio State. Notre Dame didn't play anybody close to that caliber. And Army is not in that caliber. I'm sorry, Navy is not in that caliber. The one, kind of potentially impressive, and they weren't that impressive, all things considered, Power 5 team that Notre Dame played down the stretch was a USC team that went 6-6. And, that game was a 7-point game with USC on the goal line before they threw a 99-yard pick six. So that's a really fascinating thing to think about as far as I'm concerned, is like, Indiana is not going to out-talent Notre Dame, but they could out-execute Notre Dame. It's at Notre Dame, and I think Notre Dame, they get the credit and the benefit of the doubt in playing at home. But you look at the statistics, you look at the way that Indiana has played over the bulk of the season, and you can make an argument that Indiana has a lot of things going for them and that it wouldn't be a surprise if they won. That is not something you would say out of a team that doesn't belong in the playoff. And I think that that's going to be interesting. And whether or not Indiana pulls it off, I think it's fascinating that if you look at the statistical profiles, they're very even with each other. It's very much strength on strength, as Taylor said in his podcast with me. There's a lot there to be really interested in.
Yeah, I mean, that's in one of Taylor's previews, the Bite-Sized Bison. That's what I took away is it's really going to be strength on strength. Indiana is really their defense against the rush is one of the best in the country, and Notre Dame gets the majority of their offense with the rush. So you have a lot of these two pieces coming together. And how's that going to play out?
Yeah.
And it's really going to be interesting. I think the question is going to be the other lingering question for me is how I thought Curtis Rourke threw the ball a lot better against Purdue than I had seen him throwing it against Ohio State and Michigan. I'm not saying I'm actually talking about the spiral, the way the ball looked out of his hand. Obviously, the things were wide open against Purdue. But even in some of the games, against Michigan and Ohio State, when guys, even Michigan State a little bit, when people were open, the ball had a little bit of a flutter. You could tell, maybe the thumb injury like that. That's kind of my question is how healthy is Rourke's thumb? And then how much did the offense get right with Purdue, or how much of that was just Purdue being a complete garbage of a team?
Yeah.
And, are Ohio State and Michigan going to be able to muck up our offense as much? Is Notre Dame going to muck up our offense as much as Michigan and Ohio State did? Because that really seems to be how you stop this Indiana team or really slow it down. As we've said all season, to me, the power of this team is when we get to play recite the drive, where the offense just starts to put the screws to the entire team, where it's like, we're going to score. We're going for it on fourth. We're going to kick a field goal. Like, we are getting points every time we touch the ball. What are you going to do? And that puts a lot of teams in positions where they're doing things they don't want to do. And then Indiana capitalizes on it. Michigan and Ohio State were able to kind of slow that down. And Michigan, especially in the second half, stopped that. And when that doesn't happen, our defense is still really good, but it becomes a much different type of team. So that's what I'm curious to see. Can Indiana continue that pressure that the offense is putting out there by scoring? And can they get the offense kind of mojo back that they had pre-Michigan?
Yeah, it's an open question. And, I think you brought up a lot of good points there. I mean, Rourke, it isn't just his yards have been down, but his completion percentage has been down. You go back and look pre-injury, 76% against Northwestern, 81% in that first half against Nebraska, and then 65% against Michigan State, 60% against Michigan, 44% against Ohio State, back up to 74% completion percentage against Purdue. Now, again, Purdue not nearly as good as Notre Dame defensively. But I think you bring up the last thing we'll say here, which is a continuation of what I was talking about with Taylor, which is that both of these teams are used to kind of being a freight train on offense and scoring a lot of points. And yet I think it's both teams' defenses that ultimately are going to be the key in a lot of ways, because, for Indiana, it's like you've got to stymie Notre Dame's rushing attack. And if you can do that, you're going to make it hard for Notre Dame to move the ball down the field. If you're Notre Dame, can you cause, as you said, the same level of problems versus Indiana's offensive line that Ohio State and Michigan did? Because if you do that, Indiana hasn't shown an ability to pivot in the passing game. They haven't shown a commitment to the run that would allow them to avoid some of those pitfalls. So that's really my thing. It's like, if you can, as we said with Taylor, one of the great things about this matchup is not just that it's an in-state matchup, not just that it's college football playoff with all of that on the line, but you can look at the stats and the numbers, and you can draw whatever conclusion you want to draw in terms of what the narrative is going to be and who's got the chance at being the most successful in the game. If you want to say Notre Dame's been a wagon on offense and they're going to run all over Indiana, I see the evidence to support that. If you want to say Indiana's passing game's back on track, they're going to throw for 6 touchdowns in this game, they're going to put Notre Dame on their heels, there's evidence for that as well. That's really going to be a fascinating thing. And the great thing, Scott, is we don't really know until the game actually gets underway what we're going to see out of both of these teams. That's probably my favorite aspect of it. It is absolutely it's a present that you haven't unwrapped yet. I have no idea what's in the box at this point.
Yeah, and I also think it'd be better to be at home, obviously, sure. But of all the teams we had to play, this is probably going to be the least hostile environment, again, of all the other options that are on the table. And, there is something to be said that if you can, it's college football playoff. It's a bigger game. If you can come in and get a lead, same thing against Ohio State, you come in and get a lead, it can get tense. Yeah. And there really is going to be pressure on, I'm with Fred Glass. There's more pressure on Notre Dame to get this done than Indiana. And so I think that, if you can get out to that start and you can hold it a little bit longer than you did against Ohio State and not make those mistakes and continue to keep the pressure, it's going to be really interesting to see what that crowd could be like. Again, you go down 14-0, it's a different story, but I think there's a world where if you can keep the pressure on Notre Dame, it does feel like they theoretically have more to lose here.
Yeah, theoretically. But at the end of the day, they're also going in, I think, expecting to win the game, and I certainly understand why. It'll be a lot of fun. I'm looking forward to seeing it. I'm looking forward to seeing all the IU fans up in South Bend. It should be a party for the next couple of days, like Thursday and Friday. I'm really looking forward to that.
I have one last thing for you, something that you and Mitchell Page talked about a little bit. He said something that really made me think, because I've been thinking I was going to ask you, this has got to be the most important game we've ever played at IU. And his point on the pod was that we've already played the most important game, which I like that thought process. And I think I would probably rephrase the adjectives a little bit. I think maybe it is true. We've played some of the most important games this season to get us to this point. I do think that this game against Notre Dame might be the most impactful, or maybe has the most potential upside for us. I mean, it's obviously a huge game. It probably is the most important game if we win. I don't know. There's not really a great question for you in that. I thought it was an interesting way to look at it, but it does feel like there is, we knew it before the Michigan game. Like this is a game that you step on this, you are in a different threshold of a university. We are really here now, man. Like, I mean, this is something I want to play in the space with you for 2 minutes. Cause if you win this game, if Curtis Rourke has a great game, there's some really cool stuff. I mean, you take another step as a program in a season where you've already taken more steps than I think anybody thought was. I mean, we are in the fever dream territory. The idea of winning a game in the college football playoff, going to play Georgia in the Sugar Bowl on what is it, New Year's Eve or New Year's Day?
New Year's
Day. I mean, it's, and then yes, people could say Notre Dame was overrated. It's like, you can be like, suck it. Like, for everyone who thought we didn't deserve to be here, like, suck it, suck on it. We're in the second round. We got a puncher's chance to get to the semifinal of this thing. Like, it's really wild to think.
It is. No, I mean, it is. Look, as far as whether it's the biggest game, whatever, I mean, I guess it just depends on your interpretation. It's kind of like, most valuable player versus player of the year or whatever you want to call it. It's I look at it like, of course, the college football playoff game that you play in is the most important game that you've played up to that point. And there's no question what Mitchell was trying to say, and I understood where he was coming from with the idea, well, look, the Michigan game was probably more impactful because it got us here. Or you could say the Nebraska game was more impactful because it packed the stadium in a really fun environment. I mean, there's arguments to be made for all of those, but in the way that we traditionally understand how these games operate, this is the most important game Indiana's ever played. I think it's more important than the Rose Bowl in a lot of ways that they played in 1968, because you would have teams that would rise up. They'd go to a bowl game that they weren't supposed to go to, that have an amazing season. They'd sink back into the background. That's essentially what Indiana did. It's a different game now. Like football, college football, you have to be able to put something on the table when you're talking to recruits, when you're talking to coaches, when you're talking, like when you're trying to position yourself within the landscape of college football. For all of what we heard all of last summer and all of the previous summer about, Indiana's going to get relegated out of the Big Ten. Remember that talk? Everybody was like, Indiana's going to get kicked out of the Big Ten. You're next. And it's like, no, but that was when Indiana was not very good at football, and it was easy to say that. And yeah, the win against Michigan that got Indiana into the college football playoff was probably more impactful in terms of like, that finished off or got ready to finish off what was an amazing home season. But to be in the college football playoff, to play that game, to be this national spotlight game on a Friday night against Notre Dame at Notre Dame, that to me, with the implications and the chance to go to the quarterfinals and push yourself even further up the perceptional ladder of college football, to be able to shut up all the haters who were like, why you didn't belong there in the first place. To me, there's a tremendous amount on the line in this game, above and beyond just even the competition aspects. And that's not to take away from the quality of the wins before or what they might have meant to the building of the program. But to me, there's no contest. Like, this is the most important game Indiana's ever played.
I agree. And again, I brought this up on our earlier pod. I think the timing of it also really plays well for Indiana, that if they win, and if they win in like a really cool fast, but even if they win, we are the story of the weekend. Like, it becomes going into Saturday morning. It's like, oh my God, this is fun. Like, remember that game last night? Like, in all halftime shows of all the games on Saturday, they are showing all the highlights of Indiana winning. If Indiana wins, it becomes the Cinderella story of the first weekend. Like, we own the first weekend of the college football playoff. Because even if something happens wild in the second game, it's like you're on that Saturday, you will have had just Indiana highlights all Friday night. Like, you are the marquee game. Like, right. It is all you, and you're going to have basically an 18-hour run of build-up, game, and then highlights of nothing but this game.
Right.
Yeah.
A lot on the line, and a lot to come here over the next couple of days as we get ready for this contest.
I don't even know how to get.
I
I'm
don't
not
think-
excited for a game. I don't remember when. Honestly,
no one knows how to get ready for this. So just do what comes natural is my message to you and all the IU fans out there. That is certainly what I'm planning on doing here over the next few days. So anyway, that'll wrap it up for us.
Enjoy it.
You enjoy it as well, and we'll see you up there. Absolutely. And we'll see you folks up there as well. We'll go ahead and wrap up this show. We got other shows coming up later on this week, so be sure to tune in for those. And we'll be up there. Join us at Social Cantina in Mishawaka at noon on Friday. I'll be there. I don't think Scott's going to be able to make it up, but you'll find Scott somewhere in the crowd, I promise. Just keep an eye out for him.
We're in home field.
There you go. All right. My thanks to all you folks. My thanks to Home Field, our presenting sponsor. We'll be back later on in the week with more podcasts as Indiana gets ready to take on Notre Dame in the CFP first round up at Notre Dame Stadium. And we'll be back one way or another with a recap of all of what happened probably that following Saturday or Sunday. We'll see what happens. Anyway, I'm Galen. This is Crimson Cast. We'll catch you folks on the flip side. Bring back the Bison. Stay never daunted. So long, everybody.